My wife left me for the neighbor. The story of a backup plan. My wife left me for a month with the hot new neighbor. I filed for divorce. She tried to fix it, but I'm not a backup. I guess I'm writing this to get it out of my system. My name's Mike. I'm 31, and until recently, I thought I had my life completely figured out. I've always been a simple guy. No big dreams, no crazy drama. I had a regular career as a software developer, a decent house in a quiet neighborhood, and until recently, I truly believed I had a strong marriage with a woman I loved. Laura and I met almost 8 years ago. Looking back, it feels like a lifetime. I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first job, and honestly, pretty naive about life. She was 22, an assistant at a marketing agency, trying to figure out her own career path. Spoiler alert, she never did and eventually became a stay-at-home wife. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those casual backyard gatherings with cheap paper plates and someone always burning the burgers. She walked up to me and made a snarky comment about how I looked like I was planning my escape. I don't remember what I said, but she laughed, and we ended up talking the rest of the night. After that, things moved fast. We started dating, and she brought an excitement to my otherwise mundane routine life. Laura was adventurous and spontaneous, always planning last-minute road trips or taking me to a new restaurant she'd heard about. Meanwhile, I was the grounded one. I'd be the one to figure out the budget, check the weather, and double-check the gas tank before we hit the road. It seemed to work. We balanced each other out. She brought excitement, and I offered the stability she said she lacked in previous relationships. After 3 years of dating, we decided to get married. The wedding was intimate, just family and close friends. We weren't from wealthy families, so there was no grand ballroom or extravagant catering, but that didn't matter. After the wedding, we started building our life together. We bought a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb, not the fanciest place, but it had potential. For the most part, things seemed stable. When I got home from work, Laura was usually in the kitchen or on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She'd tell me stories from her day. She worked in marketing at the time, so there was always some drama with clients or coworkers, and I'd listen. This was our dynamic. She was the storyteller, and I was the listener. We didn't have kids, but that was a mutual decision. Laura wasn't in a rush, neither was I. We both preferred to wait until we were more financially stable and ready for that big next step. We seemed to agree on most things. Looking back, I wonder if I became too comfortable. It's easy to fall into a routine, especially when life feels stable. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. Of course, we had date nights usually. Dinner at one of our favorite restaurants or a movie, but I think I stopped noticing the small details, like how Laura seemed to thrive on attention. It wasn't terrible, at least not at first. She's the kind of person who can light up a room, and people naturally gravitate toward her. I guess I started taking her vibrancy and warmth for granted, expecting they'd always be a part of our lives together. At the time, I wasn't worried. I assumed we were solid. Sure, we had disagreements now and then. What marriage doesn't? Most of the time, it was about little things, like me forgetting to take out the trash or her leaving her shoes scattered throughout the house. Nothing major, but here's the thing about relationships. They can look fine on the outside while cracks form quietly underneath. If you don't pay attention, those cracks can expand and cause the entire foundation to crumble. I didn't see it coming, at least not then. I thought we were building something strong and long-lasting. But sometimes life has a way of proving you wrong. Enter Jake, a new character, entered our lives. He moved in next door when the former neighbors, an elderly couple, downsized and relocated to Florida. He was around 28 years old at the time, making him younger than most residents in the neighborhood. He was a personal trainer, fit, confident, and, I'll admit, a little too attractive for his own good. He had the kind of body that made people look twice, like he'd just stepped out of an action movie. Jake was easy to notice from the moment. He moved in not just because of his looks, but because he was always outside doing something. Washing his car, mowing the lawn, putting up a pull-up bar in his yard. There was always a reason for him to be shirtless. He quickly became the talk of the neighborhood. Laura spotted him right away. How could she not? We first met Jake when he came over to introduce himself while we were in the yard one Saturday morning. He was pleasant, the type of person who could charm anyone. Laura started a conversation with him almost immediately, asking where he was, from what he did for a living, and how he liked the neighborhood. I remember standing there, smiling and nodding, barely able to say anything while the two of them chatted like old friends. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Laura was outgoing. She talked to everyone. We'd be just as chatty with the mailman or the guy at the hardware store. It never seemed unusual to me that she was interested in Jake. But looking back, can see the subtle changes that happened after that. It started with casual chats. Laura always found a reason to join Jake outside. At first it was small tasks, like getting the mail, watering the plants, or taking out the trash, but these brief jobs invariably led to 10 or 15-minute conversations with Jake. I once came home from work and found them talking in the driveway. Laura was holding a basket of laundry she'd been carrying to the garage, and Jake was leaning casually against his car, laughing at something she'd said. When I walked up, they both turned to me, and Laura pretended it was no big deal. Jake was just telling me about his new gym equipment, she explained casually. It didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Laura decided to bake cookies, which she hadn't done in months. I didn't think much of it until I saw her heading across the yard, a dish of cookies in hand. Just being neighborly, she remarked when I asked her about it. I shrugged it off. Laura's behavior in this regard wasn't unique. She had previously brought brownies to other neighbors, but then there was the time she bought a new set of workout clothes, bright fitted leggings, and a matching top, not something she would ordinarily wear. When I asked her about it, she said she was thinking about starting to jog again. You know, to get back into shape, she explained. I didn't question it. Laura had gone through fitness phases before, where she'd get excited about working out for a month or two before losing interest. But this time, her timing was perfect. Jake jogged almost every morning. I'd see him out there, headphones in, doing laps around the street. Laura decided her new jogging program would begin at the same time Jake was out there. I noticed them speaking on the sidewalk one morning as I was leaving for work. Laura was stretching, and Jake was showing her a way to avoid shin splints. I didn't say anything, just a quick wave, and drove away, but something in the scene stuck with me. Cracks in the foundation around this time, I saw Laura's phone habits change. She'd always been on her phone, scrolling through social media and texting her friends, but now she seemed wary when I walked into the room. She would quickly lock her screen or flip her phone over, as if she didn't want me to see anything. One night I watched her scrolling through Instagram, and when I looked over, I saw Jake's name at the top. She hastily swiped past it, but I saw enough to know she was looking at his profile. When I asked her about it, she brushed it aside. I was just checking out his fitness posts, she told me. He has some good workout advice. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go, but the small things kept stacking up. Another day, I was working in the garage and heard laughter coming from the backyard. I stepped outside to see Laura and Jake standing near the fence, laughing about something. Laura was holding an iced tea, and Jake was waving animatedly while telling a story. Laura waved at me as if nothing unusual had happened. Jake was just telling me about this funny thing that happened at his gym, she explained later when I questioned her about it. It was starting to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to sound paranoid, but you can tell when something is wrong. Laura's conversations about Jake had a new energy to them. She'd casually mention things he'd said or done, such as Jake's thinking about getting a dog, or Jake recommended this great protein shake. It wasn't what she was saying, but how she said it. Then there were the glances, you know. What I mean? When we were outside and Jake was nearby, I noticed Laura take small glances in his direction. It was subtle, but once you notice it, you can't ignore it. At this point, I hadn't said anything. Part of me refused to believe there was anything to worry about. Laura was someone I trusted. We'd been together for years, and I thought we had a good relationship. But another part of me, the one that couldn't ignore the pattern, started to question. I chose to stay quiet for now, but I began to pay closer attention. If something was happening, I had to see it for myself. The revelation, it was a Saturday morning, and I remember it vividly because it started off so typically. I woke up early, as I always do, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, browsed the news on my phone. Laura was still in bed, which wasn't surprising. She enjoyed her slow mornings, especially on weekends. The house was silent, with only the hum of the coffee machine in the background, and for a brief minute, I felt peaceful. Funny how that works. You think everything is fine because you have no idea what's about to happen? Laura entered the kitchen about an hour later. She was in her pajamas, her hair all tangled from sleeping, holding her phone in one hand and rubbing her eyes with the other. She sat across from me at the table, and I could tell something was up right away. She radiated nervous energy, drumming, her fingers on the table and gazing at her phone as if avoiding eye contact. "Are you okay?" I asked, setting down my phone. She nodded hastily before shaking her head. "Actually, no," she responded with a big sigh. "We need to talk." Anyone who's been in a relationship understands that those 4 words rarely mean anything. Good. My stomach nodded, but I tried to keep it cool. "All right," I murmured, leaning back in my chair. "What's going on?" Laura paused, her gaze flitting around the room as if she was searching for the right words. Finally, she looked at me and said, "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I think I have feelings for Jake." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "What?" I asked, leaning forward, as if being closer would make the words clearer. She bit her lip, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said hurriedly, as if trying to get ahead of my reaction. "It just happened. I've been spending time with Jake, and I feel this connection, and now I'm confused." Confused. That word hit me harder than anything else. She didn't express guilt or admit she'd made a mistake. She expressed confusion, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. My thoughts raced. Did she say she wanted to leave? Was she asking for a divorce? Was she trying to confess and move on? I couldn't tell, and that made things worse. "So what does this mean?" I asked finally. "Are you saying you're done with us?" Laura shook her head rapidly. "No, not necessarily," she replied. I don't know what I want right now. I love you, Mike. I do. But I can't stop thinking about him, and I need to figure out what these feelings mean." I felt as if the floor had been torn out from beneath me. We'd been together for years, built a life together, and now she said she wasn't sure she wanted to be with me anymore. It was surreal. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. "So what are you saying? You want to take a break?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Kind of," she responded. "I need time to figure things out. I was thinking maybe I could take a month to spend some time with Jake and see if there's something real there. If it doesn't work out, then we can focus on ourselves." I blinked, stunned by her audacity. "You're serious?" I asked, not even framing it as a question. Laura nodded, her gaze pleading. "I know it sounds crazy, but I don't want to throw away what we have without being sure. I don't want to live with regrets, you know." Regrets. The word lingered in my head like a splinter. She was talking about regrets, as if she was the one putting everything on the line, as if my feelings were secondary to her life-changing decisions. I sat there, staring at her, a mix of rage and disbelief boiling. Beneath the surface, part of me wanted to yell at her for being so selfish, but another part of me, perhaps the calmer, more calculated side, chose to stay silent and let her dig her own hole. "All right," I murmured, leaning back in my chair. Laura blinked, seemingly taken off guard. "Wait, really?" "Sure," I replied, shrugging as if it were no big deal. "If you think that's what you need, go ahead." Look flickered, as if she didn't know whether I was being genuine or mocking. "I just think it's the best way to figure out where my heart is," she admitted cautiously. "Sure," I replied. "Do what you need to do." Inside, I was already done. When she mentioned she wanted to spend a month with another man, my brain flipped a switch, but I didn't want to show my cards yet. If she was willing to abandon our marriage for a dream with a neighbor, I was curious to see how far she would go. Laura let out a relieved sigh, as if she'd just been given permission to do something heroic. "Thank you," she replied, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I really believe it's the right thing for us." I stood up and grabbed my coffee mug, pulling my hand away. "Sure," I repeated, my voice flat. "If that's what you need." She said nothing after that, simply sat there, most likely contemplating the fact that I wasn't arguing or fighting. But within, I was already planning. Moving on, Laura spent the next few days packing a modest bag. She told me she'd be staying with Jake, and she made it sound casual, as if it was simply a temporary arrangement. She didn't seem to realize that I wasn't asking questions or showing any resistance. When Laura left, the house felt different, not empty, but quieter, as if someone had turned down the volume on my life. I stood in the living room after she left, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and stared at the door. I expected to feel angry or heartbroken, but all I felt was a peculiar peace, as if the weight of pretending everything was fine had finally been lifted. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there, trying to figure out what had just happened. My wife, whom I'd been with for years and expected to spend my life with, had left to figure things out with the guy next door. If it hadn't been my life, I would have assumed it was some insane TV drama. The first few days felt odd. I started noticing the little things she'd left behind: her favorite cup on the kitchen counter, a pair of shoes near the entrance, a blanket thrown over the back of the couch. I considered moving them, but ultimately chose to leave them where. They were not because I missed her, because I didn't want to waste energy. I poured myself into work, taking on extra assignments to fill my schedule. I stayed late at the office, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to come home to an empty house. When I wasn't working, I went to the gym frequently. I had never been a regular gym goer before, but there was something fulfilling about pushing myself physically, as if I could sweat out all my stress. Friends started to realize something was off. A few of them asked why Laura wasn't around, and I responded vaguely. "She's staying with a friend for a while," I explained, trying to sound casual. I wasn't ready to dive into the real story yet. My dad was the only one I spoke the truth to. I called him a few days after Laura left, and the first thing he asked was, "What's wrong?" He's always been able to read me, even over the phone. When I told him what had happened, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he added, "Well, son, I hate to say it, but it sounds like you're better off without her." First, I wasn't sure what to say. I expected him to be more furious or ask more questions. But then he said something that stuck with me. "If she doesn't know your worth, why should you wait around for her to figure it out?" He was right. I'd spent so much time trying to understand Laura's decision and figure out where I went wrong, that I hadn't considered what I deserved. I wasn't just a backup plan in case her affair with Jake didn't work out. That night, I sat in the darkened living room staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so happy in that picture, so certain in our future. But now it just felt like a reminder of all that had gone wrong. By the end of the week, I had made my decision. I was not going to sit around and wait for Laura to make her big decision. I was going to make my own. The next day, I called a divorce attorney. The divorce sitting in that lawyer's office felt weird. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady, even though a part of me still couldn't believe it was true. The lawyer listened intently, nodding as I spoke, and when I finished, he replied, "You are well within your rights to file for divorce. This type of situation falls under irreconcilable differences." Hearing those words made things click in my head. Irreconcilable differences. This is what we had become. Laura and I weren't on the same page anymore, and perhaps we never had been. The lawyer guided me through the process, outlining what I needed to do and what I could expect. By the time I left his office, I had a strange sense of satisfaction, as if I had finally taken control of my life. Back home, started taking small steps to prepare for the inevitable. I transferred some money to a second account in case things got ugly later. I walked through the house and started mentally dividing what was mine and what was hers. I didn't touch her belongings yet. I figured I'd wait until things were official. But in my head, I was already planning how the house would look without her. The days stretched into weeks, and I grew accustomed to the stillness. It wasn't as bad as I expected. In fact, it felt pretty peaceful. I didn't have to deal with Laura's constant chatter, or the minor disagreements over trivial matters like whose turn it was to do the dishes. Meanwhile, I started hearing things through the grapevine. A neighbor reported seeing Laura and Jake at the park, looking cozy. Another person claimed to have seen them at a cafe downtown. I nodded and smiled as if nothing bothered me, but inside, I was filled with a mix of rage and pity. Anger, because she had thrown away everything we had for a fling with a guy who was unlikely to stick around. It's pity because I knew it wouldn't go well for her. Jake didn't strike me as the type to settle down, and Laura was about to find out the hard way. By the third week, I had stopped checking my phone for Laura's texts. I figured if she wanted to communicate, she'd reach out, but I wasn't. Holding my breath, I was done waiting for her. One night, while cleaning out the garage, I came upon a box of old photos from when Laura and I first met. For a brief moment, I felt a stab of sadness as I remembered how happy we had been back. Then I remembered all the subtle red flags I'd ignored over the years. All the times I'd prioritized her needs over mine without even realizing it. I closed and moved the box away. I didn't need those memories. The confrontation, Laura decided to make her spectacular reappearance almost exactly a month ago today. I hadn't heard anything from her during her brief trial with Jake. The few texts she sent were vague at best. Hope you're doing okay, or we'll chat when I get back. She didn't even try to keep me updated or pretend she was torn about her decision. It was as if she had already dismissed me as plan B by this point. I had stopped caring. I wasn't waiting by the door for her to come to her senses. I wasn't pacing the house wondering what she and Jake were doing. I had filed for divorce, and my lawyer had already started drafting the paperwork. As far as I was concerned, the marriage was over. But I didn't tell her that just yet. When she walked through the door, nothing seemed to have changed, at least for her. She had her bag draped over her shoulder, her hair nicely done, and a confident expression on her face. As if she'd just returned from a trip and was expecting me to roll out the red carpet. "Hey," she said, placing her luggage by the door. "I'm back." I was sitting on the couch scrolling between channels and barely looked up. "Welcome back," I murmured, my tone neutral. She paused, as if she was expecting more of a response. When I didn't jump up or ask how it went, she walked over and perched on the couch's arm. "We should talk," she stated quietly and carefully. I turned to face her and muted the TV. "All right," I replied, crossing my arms. "Talk." Laura smiled, the kind of smile she used when she was trying to make things better. "I've done a lot of thinking," she told me, "and I've realized some things about myself, about us, about what I want." I simply nodded, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, as if she were ready to give an impassioned statement. "I care about you, Mike. I really do, and I think we can work through this. I think we can rebuild what we have." "Rebuild?" She stated it as if it were as simple as fixing a leaky faucet. I didn't say anything, simply looked at her, allowing her to fill the silence. She was perplexed by my silence, but she persisted. "Jake's a great guy," she remarked. I had to bite my tongue to stop from chuckling at how casually she mentioned him, but I realized he's not what I need. It's fun, sure, but he's immature. He doesn't have the stability that you have. And I think I was just caught up in the excitement of it all. There it was, her big revelation. She tried out the shiny new toy and decided she liked the old one more. "Unhung," I replied, my voice cool. Laura blinked, as if she expected a more intense reply. "I know I've hurt you," she murmured, reaching out and touching my arm, "but I really believe we can get past this. We've been through so much together, Mike. We have history. It's not something you just throw away." I let her continue. I let her unload all her perfectly practiced phrases about love, forgiveness, and starting over. When she finished talking, I got up and walked over to the kitchen counter. I unlocked a drawer, pulled out the divorce papers my lawyer had sent over, and placed them on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her smile fading. "Divorce papers," I explained. Simply, her face turned pale. "You're kidding," she exclaimed, letting out a frightened laugh. "Nope," I replied, leaning against the counter, arms folded. "I'm not kidding." For a moment, she stared at the papers as if she couldn't believe what she saw. Then she glanced up at me with wide eyes. "You're divorcing me?" "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not interested in being your second choice, Laura." Her face went from shock to anger in an instant. "Second choice?" she demanded. "That's not what this is." I was confused, Mike. I needed time to figure things out. And in the process, you decided to test the waters with another man, I added calmly. You left. You walked out on our marriage. And now you're back because it didn't work out with him? Do you honestly think I'm just going to take you back like nothing happened? Laura opened her mouth to argue before closing it again, her face growing red. "It's not like that," she responded, her voice quivering. "I was trying to do the right thing. I didn't want to stay and resent you, I thought." She trailed off, her gaze darting across the room. "You thought you could have it both ways," I said for her. She stood up and crossed her arms. "You're making a mistake, Mike. We can fix this. I know we can." "No," I replied firmly. "Can't. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She looked about to cry, but I didn't let that affect me. I had already made up my mind. The rest of the conversation was a haze. She tried to argue and guilt me into changing my mind. She talked about our history, our home, and even the possibility of starting a family someday. Finally, she stormed out of the house. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where she had been, without feeling anything. No sadness, no regret, no second thoughts. Only relief. The aftermath later that night. I called my lawyer to inform him that Laura had seen the paperwork. He asked, "How'd she take it?" "Not great," I remarked, smirking. "Do you want to give her time to process, or should we move forward?" "Move forward," I instructed without hesitation. It wasn't easy standing up to Laura, but it was ultimately the right thing to do. She viewed me as a backup plan in case her fling didn't work out. If she thought I'd take it, she obviously didn't know me as well as she imagined. I knew she wouldn't give up easily. Laura wasn't the type to simply walk away from a confrontation, especially one in which she thought she was losing. I'd hardly sat down when my phone buzzed with a text from her. "This isn't over." I gazed at the message for a second before locking my phone and throwing it on the couch. She was correct. It was not over, not yet, but it would be soon enough. The following few days were eventful, to say the least. Laura arrived unannounced the next evening, banging on the door as if she were trying to break it down. "Mike, open the door," she exclaimed. I opened it, keeping a bland expression. "What do you want, Laura?" She rushed past me and stormed into the living room as if she still lived there. "We need to talk," she stated, pacing back and forth. "You can't just file for divorce without giving me a chance to fix things." I leaned against the door frame and crossed my arms. "You had your chance," I replied quietly. "You made your decision when you left." "That's not fair," she responded, her voice rising. "I didn't leave to end our marriage. I left to figure things out, to make sure I wasn't making a mistake by staying." I couldn't help but laugh dryly. "And in doing that, you proved you didn't value what we had. You don't test a marriage by running off to someone else, Laura. That's not how it works." She paused, pacing, and turned to face me, her eyes blazing with frustration. "I was confused," she remarked, her voice shaking. "I didn't know what I wanted, but I know now. I want us, Mike. I want to fix this." "Too late," I replied, my tone strong. "You don't get to come back now just because things didn't work out with Jake." Her face contorted in rage, and she pointed a finger at me. "You're being petty," she said. "You're throwing away everything we built over one mistake." I shook my head, maintaining my composure. "It wasn't just one mistake, Laura. It was a series of choices. You chose to flirt with Jake. You chose to prioritize your feelings for him over our marriage. And then you chose to leave. Those weren't accidents. They were decisions." She opened her lips to argue, but then stopped, her shoulders sagging. For the first time, she looked defeated. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked quietly. I sighed, feeling a flicker of pity for her despite everything she had done. "That's not my problem anymore," I explained. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She waited for another minute, looking as if she wanted to say anything else. But then she walked out without a word. Finality following that, the divorce proceedings moved quickly. Laura attempted to drag things out at first, perhaps hoping I would change my mind. She even tried to play the victim in front of our mutual acquaintances, accusing me of being cold and cruel. My father, on the other hand, was completely on my side. When I told him about the scenario, he let out a low whistle. "She's got some nerve," he commented. "But I'm proud of you, son. Standing your ground isn't easy, but it's the right thing to do." Laura's stalling tactics proved ineffective. My lawyer was sharp, and the proof of her leaving for Jake made things quite clear. She attempted to plead for spousal support, claiming she had given up her career for the marriage, but the judge didn't buy it. Finally, we reached a reasonable deal. She received a modest sum of money and some of the furniture she'd chosen, but I kept the house and most of my savings. It was not ideal, but it was better than I had anticipated.